I guess while we're on the name thing, now most of the tunes that you write for, maybe all of them, I'm not sure, are named after towns in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Are all of them?
About that? All of them. Since graduating from college.
Okay.
Yeah.
Impressive. I'm always, let's say, astounded.
Less impressive when you know how many towns there are in Pennsylvania.
It seems like an endless amount.
More than any other state in the union, I'll have you know.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Fascinating. Very fascinating. So you're not worried about running out of names of towns in
unless
California.
I'm like, I go into like a Bach level creativity phase.
I mean, you've written a lot of tunes.
It's a lot of tunes, but I'm still, not up to 200 even, and I got thousands. So Pennsylvania's got a lot of really stupid laws going back to like the Revolution, and because of the way Pennsylvania is a commonwealth, much like Massachusetts.
Yes.
And part of that has to do with like incorporating a town in Pennsylvania is unbelievably easy.
Okay.
So it's basically like if me and you bought some land in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, built houses there, we could name that a town and get it incorporated in like a week. So
we might have to work on this.
Right.
Later
We could have a town in Pennsylvania by the end of the month, no problem. And so because of that, unlike most other states where there's like a town and then like a large area outside the town that is like, county jurisdiction or something like that.
Yeah.
Pretty much any place anybody lives in Pennsylvania has a town name.
Okay.
So
interesting. That's why there are so many
towns, and so many of the names are so stupid.
They're super wild
because you got to come up with new ones. So you get some really weird names.
Yeah.
So having grown up there, I was aware of the number of ridiculous town names just from near where I grew up, and then kind of looking into that even a little bit more, it was like, man, this is like a endless well of stupid names. And then that ties into kind of another thing, thinking about music in general, like the naming of instrumental compositions has always struck me as pretty dumb.
Okay.
Because of the kind of inherent disconnect between any, logo-centric title and then like pure sound with no program. And so the issue has always been like, all right, so if I give a song a title, like what's that, Steve Swallow tune, like Journey to Recife or whatever, right? Now it's like you've implanted this idea in the audience's head, but you're going to play a jazz tune that like could be called literally anything else.
Okay.
And it would make no difference. Only now you've like pre-programmed the audience, and especially like less musically educated audience members, to think of it in this certain way. Like, oh yeah, we're going on a journey. And it's like, no, you're not. And if you are, why?
Sure.
And going back to like the 1800s and program music in general, like Creatures of Prometheus or whatever. It's just like it sounds the same if you call it like Raindrops and Sunbeams. Like nobody cares.
Sure, maybe. But you don't think there's any value in like?
Well, there is. The value is like manipulative though. So if I call this Journey to Recife, now everybody's thinking like we're on some journey, and that then is very limiting, I think, for improvisers, because now you're like tethered to this like programmed idea of what the song is about. And if spontaneously some other shit happens in the tune, which if you're playing jazz, it should.
Yeah, especially what you're doing.
Right. And like, you're not on Journey to Recife anymore. You're doing some other shit.
Right.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And so why'd you even call it that in the first place? And so if you're not going to have like a deliberate program where you're trying to like plant quasi-manipulative ideas in the audience's head before you play anything, just give them numbers. Works for Braxton. Or whatever. Or know that that's what you're doing and be upfront about it.
Sure.
But it's like it's a manipulative thing. And there's just been so many times when like, there'll be a tune that has some kind of evocative title and then you listen to it and it like has nothing, like that's maybe what it meant to whoever it was who wrote the tune. Or it's like super abstract. Like we were just listening to McCoy Tyner Extensions. What does extensions mean?
Right.
Like, are you talking about the chords? Whatever. You're just like shredding over some modal stuff and it's awesome. You could have called this like the alphabet, or you could have called it like Sunshine.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter.
Sure. But even the Braxton thing, like to some degree, like if you call it piece 23J, that's its own. That's almost its own thing.
And he, from reading all his stuff, he's got a vast sea of nomenclature and ideas behind all those titles, which is awesome, and that's cool.
But you're saying it doesn't implant some image in somebody's head or something they have to follow.
But it still is going to have an effect. So then I was like, all right, I need to just pick something random to like name all the tunes after.
Okay.
And like I studied biology in college. I was like, I could just pick like bio terms. This one's called mitochondria, and this is called like whatever.
Yeah.
But I was like, it's dumb. And I was like, well, if it's gonna be dumb, let's get like really dumb. And so Pennsylvania town names it is. And then that also then turned into an opportunity where I can like tell these like elaborate or ridiculous stories about these towns, and none of that has anything to do with the tune.
Sure.
But it like provides this narrative that's like a red herring.
Okay.
Like, here's a my current tunes are all about towns where like disasters have happened.
Yeah, I was gonna ask
So
you
I'll get up
about
on
that.
stage and I'll be like, all right, this is called Centralia, and Centralia is this town where there's this mine fire that's been going forever. It's burning underground and it'll never go out. Like, there's a great metaphor there. And then the tune is like the tune. It's some crap that I sat down and wrote at the piano. And I very much like that version of things where I'll like tell these, with a 7-piece band too, I'll tell these like elaborate stories about some of these towns. And then we're just playing a jazz tune. And like it's going to go wherever it goes, and it does its thing. And I could have called it anything, but like I'll take these like, quirky town names as a way of dodging the whole program music thing.
Yeah. And
Like,
to let the audience decide
right.
their adventure
This is
gonna
clearly
be.
not about a town in Pennsylvania.
Right.
So think of it what you will, but I'm going to tell you this funny story about Pennsylvania anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
And then that, it avoids the kind of game of cat and mouse that I hear people talk about all the time, where it's like, you'll play some like, here's, ballad for my significant other. And then you play like a ballad. It's like, oh, that was so sweet. And it's just like, we could have just played Misty, that's the same thing, like, are we really like, we're still just playing a song, and like, theoretically, that maybe there's some emotional content or not. I could also sit down on the piano and write like a sappy ballad about nothing, and then tell you like, this is for my dog that died, and we'll be like, oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
But it's not, or maybe it is. It doesn't matter. Like, if you're actually listening to the thing as music, that shouldn't, like, that's only going to interfere. Like, you're just going to like program the audience to think a certain thing, and now you're going to hear this as like, me writing this sweet song for my significant other. And you're not going to be really like paying attention to what's actually happening, or you're going to like view it through that lens.
Yeah.
So even if we go off into left field and start like, shredding or doing something like musically inappropriate,
Sure.
Now like, okay, are you now supposed to interpret that I don't like my significant other, and this is some like unconscious like angst? Like, no,
Sure.
we're like playing abstract music that like is going to mean something different to everybody. Like,
Yeah.
just do that.
But do you think that would that change if you were writing music that was much more, let's say, composed or specific, or in any regard, you want the audience to be free to interpret it to their free discretion?
I want the audience to be free, and like, not to Beethoven in 2020, which gets annoying, but like, Symphony Number 5 is fucking Symphony Number 5.
Sure, works.
Doesn't need a program. It's killing.
Yeah.
Symphony Number 9, it's got a program. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like
Sure.
the first 4 movements are badass. Like, even if you get rid of the last, and so it's just like,
Yeah.
we're also programmed that like, right, we clearly don't need titles to like enjoy abstract music.
Yeah.
Or like, what's the Ornette record where all the titles are just initials? Is that Circle with the Hole in the Middle?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
They
like,
all mean something, but
they
it
all
doesn't
mean
matter
something,
what
but
it
I don't
is.
know what they mean.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
read
yeah.
what they meant, and I stopped. Like, I didn't like it registered for like 30 seconds, and then I didn't care.
whatever.
Like, C and D is awesome.
Yeah,
Like,
right. Yeah,
it doesn't
yeah,
matter
yeah.
what that's about. It
Sure.
sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder about that. It's an interesting point for sure, and it's an age-old question: is do
Right.
we need to title these things or not? And there are certain things that, like, I love Anthony Braxton's music that doesn't need a title, and it conveys whatever it conveys, and I
Right.
can feel it or understand it or whatever.
Yep.
And then sometimes I'll listen to the Rite of Spring and be like, it's kind of cool that they're whatever this,
Right.
the narrative was in that particular context.
Right. And in that context, the title is really just telling you something about the creative process. And I like to think that the Rite of Spring would be just as awesome if it was called like Ballet Number 2.
Sure. Yeah.
But knowing that, like, all right, this is a bunch of Russian dudes in Paris trying to be super edgy, and like that's how they got to this place. Cool. And so the argument can be made either way, but I think it's just like, because it can go either way, and the program side of things can be so manipulative, I'd rather just like steer clear of that altogether.
Yeah, especially with what you're doing. It sounds like because
Right.
you are going to make a left turn at any given
Gonna
moment.
make a left turn at any
and you
given
want to
point.
be prepared
So
for that.
right, yeah. So maybe let's just not pretend that we're not going to do that.
Right.
And yeah, like just thinking about like classical composers' symphonies, they just have numbers,
Yeah,
and like
totally works.
it doesn't need more than that. Or like Gershwin preludes, doesn't need a title.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's number 2.
Yeah.
Sounds great. you
Right.
know?
Yeah, exactly.
And so you clearly don't need to do that. And when you do it, it's going to be manipulative no matter what. So, make that decision up front, knowing that, like, even if you're trying, you might fail. Like, you can give it what you think is meaningful title, and then someone else hears it and, like, doesn't get that at all.
Yeah.
So, if you're going to bother, fine, but, like, I'm not going to bother.
Yeah.
So I got as you can see on the shelf right there, the yellow, next to the Atlas of the World is the Atlas of Pennsylvania, next to the speaker.
Oh, perfect.
And so I just, like, pull that sucker out and look at the map and pick a funny one and red tune.
Yeah. I was wondering about that. I was wondering about the title to This Is Our Music, and then I was looking through a map of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, rather, trying to book some gigs, and I was like, there it is!
Yep.
What a
That's
strange name for a town.
Not far from where I grew up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I have a good friend that grew up in music. So, yeah, that one was a gimme. And Shamokin. Like, there's a town called Shamokin. That's hilarious.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. It's funny, too, because you pair it with all the recreations of the album covers. That's got to be fun to do that.
That was super fun. And I was telling Diana this story, like, a couple of days ago. We were talking about, like, the WBGO kind of, racial sensitivity trauma that's going on a little bit right now. And, Rashawn Roland Kirk's widow was working there for years, and I went and did an interview there for one of their shows with Ron. And the cover to 40 Fort is a recreation of Roy Haynes Out of the Afternoon with Roland Kirk. So on the cover, Arabagon is, like, dressed exactly like Rashawn Roland Kirk in that picture. We spent all this time, like, tracking down the right clothes and blah, blah, blah.
That's amazing.
And she was, like, concerned.
Oh, really?
So she's like, yeah, like, why did you do that? And, so then we're just like, well, growing up, that was one of my favorite records. And we play jazz, but we're these, like, conservatory trained, non-African-American musicians who, like, have this weird relationship to that music, like, through recordings and, like, this, kind of strange kind of hero worship, so that, like, when we play, we're, like, immediately aware of, like, the history of how we got to this point, but we don't want to be a historical recreation band. Like, we don't want to, like, copy what, your late husband did, even though he's this massive influence.
Sure.
So we play this music that, like, takes that and, like, warps it into our own version. But then we, like, go home and listen to this record because it's one of our favorite records. So we wanted the cover to do the same thing. So we're, like, kind of taking on this, like, persona of, Roy Haynes and Tommy Flanagan, because that's kind of what we're doing musically. We're, like, we're not this person, but we're, like, standing in this weird kind of, pod people.
Yeah.
We're, like, musical pod people. We're, like, we can't actually ever be those people or play their music exactly, so we're trying to, like, come as close as we can, which creates this really weird juxtaposition.
Sure.
Because, like, we don't want to insult our favorite music by just, like, doing the same thing over and over again, but we also don't want to, except sometimes, but we also don't want to just, like, completely pretend that those are not our, like, massive influences. And so then she was like, that's real sweet. And, then,
Nice.
like, I sat down at her desk and had this, like, 45-minute conversation with her, and she's, like, one of the sweetest people I've ever met. But, like, I think she was, like, and rightfully so, worried that, like, we kind of, like, thought it was silly or stupid.
Yeah, but
It's
really,
like,
it's paying
It's like,
tribute
no,
to
like, that was my favorite record when I was, like, 11.
Yeah.
Like, I used to play that record all the time. Like, they played, some standards on there, and they're like, Kirk is doing his, like, multiple horns thing, and, like, 11-year-old me thought that was, like, the coolest thing I'd ever heard. So
Yeah.
Fly Me to the Moon is on that record.
Oh, yeah.
Killing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, right, like, every time I play Fly Me to the Moon, I think of your husband doing that thing, and it's, like, the happiest shit ever.
Yeah.
But, like, I don't want to actually do that. I want to do, like, my weird version of that tune.
Sure.
But, like, one informs the other, so, like, let's make the art do the same thing that the music does.
No doubt.